November is just around the corner, and that means the 16th Annual National Podcast Post Month is fast approaching. Hi, I'm Jennifer Navarrete, founder of NaPodPomo, and I'm inviting you to join the 30-day Global Podcasting Challenge. Whether you're a newbie looking to start your first podcast or a seasoned pro seeking inspiration, NaPodPomo is the perfect place to experiment and try new things. Visit napodpomo.org to learn more. See where podcasting can take you this November during National Podcast Post Month.
And they did some tests on me as a child. And they came back and told my parents, we have some news. Your son has a disease called Infantile Spinal Muscular Atrophy. And unfortunately, the prognosis is death. He should die before he's 5. The most we've ever seen somebody with the infantile diagnosis. Now, mind you, this was in the late 70s, early 80s, was 12 years old. And as I said, I'll be 51 in November. Because at the age of 5, my life was going like normal to me. I had a brother and sister took me everywhere they went. My family decided, my mom and dad decided, when they were walking me out of the hospital, they were ministers, pastors, actually assistant pastors at that time. And they just said, Howard, we told God that as long as he allowed us to have you, we were going to raise you like all of our other children and in the house of God. And that's what they did. And so at the age of 5, my grandparents on my mom's side got me an appointment at the Shriners Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. And I went there and they did a whole bunch of blood tests. And they came back and they said, well, we don't know how to explain it, but the disease has arrested itself. And my mom said, you mean remission? Like a cancer? They're like, no. And they said, interestingly enough, if you think about a storm, like a tornado, how it goes through and does damage, and then there's no wind, there's no rain, there's no nothing. It's just the damage. They said that's kind of what happened. The disease said as much as it's going to do, we can't find it. It's gone.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I have an amazing guest joining me. I've had the opportunity to speak to this gentleman's better part. I would always say about my wife is that she's my better part as well. But now I get to talk to Howard Bell on the podcast from yieldedlife.org. And there's a lot of great things to talk about with Howard on the podcast. Howard, welcome to the podcast. It is an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. It's an honor to be here.
Great. So Tiffany was on the podcast and I got to speak with her. She is a beautiful soul. You have hit a home run with having Tiffany with you on your team as a husband and wife.
Wasn't at the home run, it was a grand
slam home run. I love it. She is going to be monitoring our conversation for quality, so we'll keep that in mind. But it's so great to meet with you as well. Welcome to the show. Where are you in this big world, Howard?
I am in Arizona. I'm actually a suburb of Arizona called Avondale.
Nice.
A suburb of Phoenix called Avondale.
And I mentioned to Tiffany that I went to Phoenix, Arizona. I'm in Canada. I went to Phoenix, Arizona for the first time in August a few years ago. And I basically melted as I left the airport for the first time. And those doors opened. And I had never been to Phoenix before. I was almost ready to jump on the plane and go home. It was so hot in August.
I tell people, I say, look, if you're in ministry and you believe in a hell and you don't want people to go there, bring them to Arizona in August from anywhere in the world. And they'll get out the plane and go, I don't want to go there. And then you can preach the message. If you don't want to go here,
there you go.
You definitely don't want to go to a hotter place.
It is a very good visual. And I swear there was people, I think, that live in Arizona sitting by the exits just to watch people like me melt for the first time because they were chuckling and pointing at me like, oh, watch this guy. And as soon as those doors opened for the first time, oh, my goodness, it was so hot.
I remember flying back to Detroit in December one year. And it was unseasonably warm in Arizona. But when we got to Detroit, it was snowing. So then I get on the plane to come home, and I remember those same people. I'm thinking, I'm from Arizona. I am ready. But when that heat hits you, when you open them doors, you still go, whoa, boy, that's hot. So I don't know if you ever get quite acclimated to it.
Right. Yeah, but it's a beautiful place. I did not want to come back to Canada. Once I got there and I got to meet some really amazing people there, such a beautiful place. And I went to Scottsdale, did a little touristy stuff as well. But I thought it was such a beautiful, beautiful city. Nice people.
If you don't mind, what brought you here?
I was working for PetSmart at the time, and that's where their head office was. So we had an office in Canada, and they flew me down for some training. So it was really fun, though. I really enjoyed it.
You know, the one thing about Arizona is people would think, oh, it's hot. It's a terrible place because it's so hot. But you can drive 2 hours and be in the most beautiful weather.
Right.
In the pines, of Arizona. Up north in Arizona, you got the Grand Canyon and some of the most beautiful things you've ever seen in the world.
Right.
And about an hour and 45 minutes from where I live, you got something called Sedona, the most beautiful red rock formations.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's a beautiful place to live. It's about an hour away from anything you want to do.
There you go. It's great. Howard, tell me more about your story. I've found so much inspiration listening to you on other podcasts and other interviews where I've seen you and heard you. You have an amazing story. You help so many people together with your wife and also on your own. And you just have a message of hope for people. I'd love to give people who haven't met you yet through my show a little backstory about who you are, and then we can carry our conversation from there.
Not a problem at all. When I was in my early 20s, I'll be 51 in November. But when I was in my early 20s, I did a radio broadcast called More Than a Conqueror. It was the name of the first book I wrote, which is really my autobiography up to that age. And I tell people that for the visual effect, I weigh about 45 pounds. I use about 17%. That's 17% of my lung capacity. And I'm considered a quadriplegic. I am a person with full sensation. But at the age of 1, my parents took me to the doctor because I have an older brother and sister. And I didn't develop like they did. I wasn't pulling up to tables. I wasn't crying as fast. So when they took me to the hospital, they had to drive me 3 hours from a little town called Parkersburg, West Virginia, which is where I was raised till I was 17. And they drove me 3 hours to Columbus, Ohio. And they did some tests on me as a child. And they came back and told my parents, we have some news. Your son has a disease called Infantile Spinal Muscular Atrophy. And unfortunately, the prognosis is death. He should die before he's 5. The most we've ever seen somebody with the infantile diagnosis. Now, mind you, this was in the late 70s, early 80s, was 12 years old. And as I said, I'll be 51 in November. Because at the age of 5, my life is going like normal. Normal to me. I had a brother and sister who took me everywhere they went. My family decided, my mom and dad decided when they were walking me out of the hospital. They were ministers, pastors, actually assistant pastors at that time. And they just said, Howard, we told God that as long as he allowed us to have you, we were going to raise you like all of our other children and in the house of God. And that's what they did. And so at the age of 5, my grandparents on my mom's side got me an appointment at the Shriners Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. And I went there and they did a whole bunch of blood tests. And they came back and they said, well, we don't know how to explain it, but the disease has arrested itself. And my mom said, you mean remission? Like a cancer? They're like, no. And they said, interestingly enough, if you think about a storm, like a tornado, how it goes through and does damage, and then there's no wind, there's no rain, there's no nothing. It's just the damage. They said that's kind of what happened. The disease did as much as it's going to do. We can't find it. It's gone. And so I tell everybody it's kind of funny. I have, up until I was married, I weighed 45 pounds. After I got married, which was a year and a half to 2 years ago, I gained a few pounds. And so when you marry a woman with Southern cooking.
Oh, no. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? It's pretty bad. I had pants that were taken in, and now I got to get them taken out. That's pretty sad. Or good, depending on how you're looking at it. But I purposed a very long time ago that if God was going to give me a life, a prolonged life, I was going to make it worth everything I could. And every never that I got, I turned it into I will. You'll never get married. That was my last one. That you'll never have kids. I got married and I inherited a daughter. And so I got kids and I'm married. I got it all at once. I'm the happiest man alive. But that's pretty much the bookends of the story. There were a lot of challenges in between.
Mm-hmm.
They said I'd never get married. I would never graduate. I graduated as valedictorian from high school and a community college. Graduated summa cum laude from ASU. They said I'd never hold down a job. I've had jobs, I've built businesses and worked in building actually public charter schools in Arizona and around the country. So I've been very fortunate to do those things. And now, most recently, I have my second book out entitled Yielded, The Posture of True Love. And it's really about a message that God gave me that I can preach or teach or talk about in any genre or setting. So if I'm in a church, I talk about many people that believe in God because they're afraid of hell, or they want a blessing, or, they're not sure where they're going to spend eternity. But I said, really, he sent his son to die for us so that we would choose, not out of fear, not out of, oh my gosh, I need a blessing, but out of his love for us. He wanted us from love to choose love so that we could live forever in love. And so I talk to people about that. And in the natural or the secular world, I talk to people about going through the process of life. Yielding, you can be obedient to a police officer. You can be obedient to the signs that say no smoking or smoke free. And you can be obedient to all those things. But that doesn't mean that you're yielding. I have to laugh because here in the United States, we have these triangular yellow signs that say yield. Mm-hmm. And most of my buddies growing up, they'd be like, yield. They take off faster and go right to it, right? But those that really, really know what the signs are, they'll slow down, or the yellow light. They'll slow down, they'll look at the traffic, and they'll adjust accordingly. But they make that choice. Because if they don't, like on the freeway, if we don't adjust accordingly, we end up having all kinds of car accidents. We end up having somebody killed or hurt or maimed. And sometimes when life throws at us circumstances, like several people I know, they have jobs and they're like, oh, I've got to go to work. Mm-hmm. What would you do if you could change your mind in your world to such a positive environment that you'd say, I get to go to work? Because there's other people that don't have jobs.
Right.
Not out of guilt, but I love what I do. So many people are like, Howard, I just feel so unfulfilled and I never succeed in anything I do. And I go back and ask them, well, what do you love to do? There's a lot of people that love art that are working in machine shops, doing the same thing over and over again. And I encourage them. Maybe it's because you need to yield to what you love. Find something in that arena so that every day you go to work, it's not a job, it's a privilege.
Mm.
And that's what I've done. I used to work every day for a paycheck.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, we have to have money to survive in the world. But I got to thinking in 2014 when I was working my job and I was doing really well, and I got sick and I ended up with sepsis. And I went into a coma for about 3 days. And I woke up and my face is all swollen from the water retention. And, it was just a very disorienting time. But while I was out, I had a visitation, I guess you'd call it. But I was having conversations with people that had already been at their funerals, or I had preached their funeral. And there were just conversations like, hey, how you doing? It's so peaceful here. It's good to see you. Almost like an old family reunion type thing. Mm. And I wouldn't move, but the scene would change. Like all of a sudden I'd be talking to you, and let's just say the screen shifts to the left and there's somebody else to talk to. And I remember as I was waking up, the last person saying to me, well, we'll see you later. We know you can't stay. And as I woke up, I heard, but will you yield? And at that time, I wasn't really going to church a whole lot. I had started feeling like my job was a job. I liked the people and I liked what I did, but it was just the same old every day. And I kept hearing that, will you yield? And within 2 months, something happened that most people would take as a tragedy or hardship. But I was brought in and told that my whole department was being done away with, and I didn't have a job. And they gave me 3 months severance. And for some reason, at first I wanted to get real worried. But I heard that same voice that say, will you yield? Say it again, will you yield? And I said, you know what? You've got me. And from that day until now, God has given me this message of yielding that I speak, and I use my body as a demonstration all over the world. Because when you pick me up and take me on my chair, my arms will flail. I'm pretty flaccid. I have no muscular control whatsoever. So whoever picks me up, in the secular world, they say fate. If it's fate that's picking you up and you're believing and trusting the process, then know this, that wherever you go, if you give your trust to that process, you will end up in a place that is full of peace. It'll bring you the most reward, whether it's financial or just inner peace. But it's when we question and we fear and we doubt. You see, when a caregiver picks me up out of my chair, if I haven't already established that they know what they're doing, that whole process can be very scary, very unrewarding. But when I trusted them in the process and they've learned me and I've learned them, then it truly is a posture of love. And so that's really what I go and do now. And I'm actually thinking about starting a third book right now. And I already have the title for it.
Good.
Because I did it 2 Sundays ago at a church. But I think I want to do a book called Bound for Freedom and talk about how that our hardships can in a moment seem so binding and so confining. But they're really not only for our freedom, but someone else's. Because when we go through something, we're going through it so that our story can become his story to help others with their story. Hmm. Sorry, I know I talked a lot there.
No, and I love when you say his story, my mind also went to history. Those two words together, right? They become our history and his story at the same time.
Right. And I can't take credit for that. One of my mentors, my pastor for more than 30 years, used to talk about his story. Mm-hmm. I thought, you know what? That is so profound. And I've tried to always implement that no matter what I'm going through today, no matter how hard it is, no matter what the challenge is. Because there are days, Dave, I wake up and go, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. Someone has to take care of me. Someone has to feed me. In fact, when I heard the voice say, will you yield? I got mad and said, boy, this is some sort of joke.
Mm.
How much more yielded can you get? I have full sensation of my body, which means a fly can land on me, walk all around my face, tickle me, and I can't even swat it off. But I've learned not to get angry because the fly is just being a fly. My anger doesn't change the fly.
Mm. Wow. What a perspective.
So,
I love that.
Now I know that we can get up and swat a fly. We can kill a fly, it becomes a nuisance. But there are other things in life that come along. You can't kill every fly. I think the Bible says it this way. Offenses will come, but God's made a way to escape out of every one of them. And that way to escape is through yielding to the process with the Spirit of God as your guide.
What do you think, from your perspective, that maybe readers are struggling with when the topic of yielding comes up? What kind of things do you bring out in the book that help us direct our thoughts towards how we can be more yielded?
I think that people think that when they're obedient, they're yielded, or when they're compliant. I've heard so many people say, I minister the gospel. I'm totally yielded. But then God will ask them to do something crazy, like walk away from your job and trust me. That's not God. That's not even wisdom. Are you really yielded? Or you see somebody, we see it all the time, and God forbid it happens. But you take a well-known minister, a high-powered CEO, their gifting can change everything in their world. But when there's an illness or something that not even doctors can fix, now there's no choice but to yield to the process. I've dealt with people in my lifetime that have become disabled through an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it'll take days, sometimes it'll take weeks, sometimes months, years. Some never do this. But the longer they look at what they could have had or should have had, they'll never get what they can have. And so we have to go in and say, hey, it's not settling. But if we make no strides to get out of the anger of looking back at what we lost, and if we make no strides of getting out of the frustration of not being able to do what we think we should have been able to do, then what we do is we stay in a cyclone that spirals and spirals and spirals into a depression that ends up suppressing the true purpose that God had in our lives.
Mm. And the one thing I want to jump back to as well, Howard, is that you mentioned about when someone's there to work with you and help you in your day-to-day, that there's an element of trust as they lift you and work with you and help you, right? There's an element of, if they were to be not careful, they could cause injury, they could cause damage, and there's a trust from your perspective with a caregiver, and that we also, in our lives, have to have an element of trust for those around us who can help us. Whatever, if it's our situation or whatever we're in, we need to trust those around us that they have their best intentions for us as well, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think even though this isn't mentioned in the book, what I have discovered is that even with my own caregivers, like there's a process for putting on my clothes, okay? If that process isn't followed, I can get hurt. They can get hurt. Their back can get hurt. So what you do is you say, all right, here's why this has to be done this way. And if you're not careful, if we're not careful, trust is never earned or achieved. Because if everybody wants to do it their own way and they can't communicate it and they can't take the time to hear other ideas, sometimes you'll never get accomplished what you need to get accomplished.
Right.
So it's like, I don't mean to say everything's about God, but in my life, it's been about God. So when it comes to trusting God, sometimes we'll look at an unsuccessful outcome and say, well, that's the reason I can't trust God. I got to do it myself. But what we're looking at as an unsuccessful outcome can often be a protection from what would have happened if we'd have got the outcome we thought we wanted.
Right.
My wife is often noted as saying, we pray for $1 million blessing, but God's grace says, hey, you can't even handle $100 blessing. If I give you $1 million, you're going to really implode. That's my words, but he's so gracious that when we think about things and then we don't get them, we think we can't trust him. But in reality, he's still been faithful. So when people look at me in my wheelchair, they're like, well, how come you're not sad all the time? How come you're not depressed all the time?
Right.
Well, two things. One, I've already experienced more things in my life and had a lot of success in some areas that other people have not. So I've been blessed. If there's not one more day, I've been blessed. I've got a wife like no other wife.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blessed in that alone. I got a daughter like no other daughter. That's a blessing if I had just that in my life. But I've got a father and a mother and a brother and a sister that have done some things also. If that were enough. And then I look back over all the things. I've been through a tornado and a refrigerator landed on top of me. I got left in a fire and it put itself out. I've been in car accidents and never got hurt. I had my shoulder broken, went back into a state of like semi-coma for a day. And I came out of it. I'm still here. There's struggles, there's trials. But if all of that's all I ever did, like you said earlier, the stories have already been told. They've already been written. There's videos, there's books, but I'm not done yet because I'm still breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And that means God's not done yet because I'm still breathing. And so if, when I go on these shows and talk about what I've done, I don't talk about it out of pride, well, look at me. I talk about it out of encouragement. Because if I can do it, I'm not unfamiliar with the fact that my voice sounds different. I'm not unfamiliar with the fact that my body's shaped differently than most people's. But if I can do it with all of that,
right,
then I want to encourage somebody out there to know, hey, your loss is not your finality. Your pain is not the end. And I guess the second thing totally is this. If I believed this life was it, I think I would have a hard time. But because I don't think this life is it, even to those that are listening that may not be Christian in their faith, we all can understand legacy. We all can understand that we leave behind a trail of kernels for others to reach their full potential. So this life really isn't it. My life is the seed that produces somebody else's orchard, which produces somebody else's food generations from now.
Wow, that's powerful. And we talked before we hit record that I mentioned the apple analogy about the apple seeds, and that you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed. And
Right.
that our story lives on and impacts people far and wide beyond what we can count and measure. Because somebody's life has changed and they change someone else's life, and it continues way beyond what we even know. And so as much as we want to measure all the results in our life, sometimes they're immeasurable. And I think we're going to be surprised and humbled when we find out how far and wide our message has actually gone beyond what we realize.
I believe it. I believe that's not only true, but I believe the truest, biggest blessing in life is to be able to look back while you're still alive. My great-grandmother did something that I thought was so crazy, but she lived to be 103. And when she hit 95, she called her grandchildren over to her house. And she said, here, I want you to have this, and I want you to have this, and I want you to have this. And now I'm going to move into an assisted living. She gave everything away before she died. And I thought, that's backwards. That's crazy. So I asked her, I said, Grandma Grace, why'd you do that? And she said, well, I've lived so long watching people leave stuff to people. And if people get it out to the dead, they walk to the casket and say, thank you. I wanted to be able to hear it and see it while I was alive.
Mm.
And at 103, when she passed, and I spoke her funeral, my grandma, who has such a way with words, which was her daughter, we're at the funeral home, and there's a total of 7 people for her funeral. I'm like, oh, how sad. And my grandmother leans over to me and says, it's all a matter of perspective. I said, what do you mean? She said, you say it's sad because the room is empty. But Grandma Grace would say, how joyful. I said, why? She said, because she was able to outlive all of her friends.
Mm.
So there was no one to come. They're all having a party. And I said, that's so true. So we preached the funeral. We laid her to rest at 103. And in that one moment, I realized that if I can tell my story here, make a difference in people's lives while I'm here,
Right.
then that's reward enough. Don't get it wrong. I want big houses.
Mm-hmm.
I like to have a backyard with a swimming pool. I live in a very nice place now, and that's all good. But how much better is it to go to a prison, speak to them, give them hope,
Mm-hmm.
and see them turn around, build a business, straighten out their lives, restore themselves with their children, and build their legacies. No greater reward.
It's amazing. I think all of us have a platform. We all have somewhere that we can speak from, whether it's our story, our situation, our experiences, everything combined. And that gives us a platform to reach people that we would not be able to reach if we had not had that platform. And what I love about what you do, Howard, is you're taking a message that you're living and sharing that. And the name of my podcast is Living the Next Chapter. So I have a question for you, Howard. What is your next chapter? You said a new book maybe in the future, but for you, what is your next chapter?
That's a really good question. My next chapter really is reaching more people.
Okay.
Building a legacy for my daughter, not just of wealth, but a legacy of people whose lives are changed, whose commitment and honor is not based on business model or street gang model, but it's built on, hey, I do what I do because I love. And I love because I've been loved.
Hmm.
And that's it.
It's amazing. Howard, I could talk to you all day, but I know you're being gracious with your time, and I really appreciate it. Any last words of wisdom, Howard, from your perspective for a new author who is timid about sharing their story? Maybe they're fearful that they won't be accepted for their story, or they don't feel like their story is impactful enough to share with the world. From your perspective, what would you say to a new author about getting their story into the world and why that matters?
Well, first of all, I would say this. In my first book, I think I said this quote this way. I said, when we learn to master our second-by-second decisions, then our minute-by-minute problems and our hourly issues will all take care of themselves. And I would say the same thing to anybody that's like, I don't know if I should write a book. If you've told your story over a cup of Starbucks, or you've shared your story with your best friend and you both have cried tears and laughed a lot, why not share that with someone that tomorrow will go through something very similar to what you've been through and is wondering whether or not they can make it, wondering how they can do it better, wondering if they could do it differently. We never know the power of the written word because so many times the power of unspoken fear overrules it. So what I would say is this. My closing statement would be, perfect love drives out fear. Don't let fear keep you from letting someone else experience their perfect love.
That's beautiful, Howard. That's exactly where we need to land on this. Everyone, I would really encourage you to go over and check out yieldedlife.org. There is ways for you to donate for both Howard and for Tiffany and the great work they're doing. They are out there speaking, like Howard was mentioning, in the jail system and working with people who are looking for answers in life. And the books are available. You can donate directly to Yielded Life. There's many ways that you can participate and support this amazing couple and their message. And I would encourage you to go check out the information in the show notes and make your voice heard, and accept the calling of sharing your message with the world as Howard and Tiffany have both demonstrated, and get your message out there because someone needs to hear your words. Howard, again, thank you for making time to do this and being a part of the show. I'm looking forward to having many more conversations with you in the future.
Well, thank you for having me. It was an honor.
Awesome. Everyone, all the information's in the show notes. And Howard, please give my best to your amazing wife as well and your family. And again, thank you so much for being part of this.
I will, Dave, and thank you.
Thanks for being part of the podcast again. Appreciate you investing time in the show, and if you're listening this far, thank you. One thing to keep in mind is we are looking for help and some support for the podcast. If you are able to help support our show, our little podcast show here, we can go over to livingthenextchapter.com and all the instructions will be there to help support the show. It takes about $30 to $40 a month to do this, just for the hosting and all of that other stuff that we pay for. But if the show is giving you any value and you're enjoying what's happening here, would love any kind of support that you can offer. That would be great. And you being here and sharing the show helps us grow, helps us get great new authors on the show, connect with other listeners, and build community. So whatever you can do to share this show today, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here for Living the Next Chapter, and I can't wait to share the next one with you. Talk soon. Have a great day.